Hello and welcome, coaches, to this important conversation. It's amazing that we have 116 years of coaching experience at this table. I, for one, am on tiptoes of anticipation to see exactly what each of you have to say on these important issues. To my right, D.W. Rutledge, Executive Director of the Texas High School Coaches Association. Welcome. Coach Glen West, Brenham High School, was one of our panelists and head coach there at one of those storied programs. And then, of course, directly across from me is Coach Ken Rucker, longtime coach. He's got almost 40 years experience or more, if not. A lot of coaching experience at this table once again. This conversation is important because we're at a very important time in our nation's history. It's been said that leadership is the attribute in greatest demand, yet shortest supply. And it begins, for the most part, with what's not happening in the homes of the kids that you guys coach often. Our first subject is the vulnerable athlete. You know, coaches, many of them don't understand that they're vulnerable. We liken it to like a quarterback who comes at the line of scrimmage and he's trying to identify threats. Then if he can see them, maybe he calls a play that gives him the best chance to succeed against that threat. Then he has to execute the play. Fatherlessness in the home. Fatherlessness in the home is a very significant problem at the line of scrimmage of these kids' lives. Beginning with you, DW, unpack that from your perspective and why is it a problem? What can we do about it?
Well, I think, of course, the why of it all is a real concern. If you look back at the statistics back in 1950, there was 6% of homes in America were tagged as fatherless homes. 6%. Today, 6%. 6%. Okay. Today, over 35% of American families or American kids have fatherless homes. That's one out of about every three kids come from a fatherless situation, and it's something that's epidemic in our country. There's no doubt about it, and I think it's when you look at that and identifying the vulnerable athlete, I think that's one of the things that is one of the biggest challenges for coaches out there today.
Glenn, you're engaged in that space right now. How do you recognize it when a kid is coming from a difficult context?
Well, a couple of things. Just in their behavior, I'm thinking back to a young man that was losing weight and couldn't finish his workouts. And turns out that, as we looked into it, he wasn't being fed. He wasn't being fed because he lived on a dirt floor with no electricity and nobody at the home. It's interesting. Through the years, I've always been able to go back and look. And at the beginning of the year, I could tell what kind of team we were going to have based on the two-parent families.
Wow.
If we had a lot of two-parent families, that was going to be a really good year. Because if there wasn't, even though you had a lot of ability, at some point, the adversity would set in. And even with success, and you would self-destruct. And so at that point, you've got to look at what can we do to solve this problem or to stand in the gap with that.
Ken, have you had the perspective and been able to go back and look and juxtapose what it was like coaching? You've been in it for a long time, and we're in it for a long time. What do you see that has changed in that time period between the athlete when you were coaching them versus what you see today?
Well, the athlete today, being that there are not fathers in the house, sometimes they feel like that they are more desired, more, and sometimes a young man takes on himself as the father because they may be lack. They may have, they may not have the things they need in the home. Mom may not. She's working 2 jobs, but still not enough. So he's trying to be dad too, in lots of times. And sometimes you find a defense there, especially when a male figure as a coach comes into his life. Sometimes there's some resistance because, hey, it's just natural. He's trying to protect. He's trying to do. And I know the difference when I played. I know the difference when my mom and dad both worked. I had 2 parents, but dad wasn't around a lot of the times. But I had a strong mama. And I'm not saying the mothers aren't strong, grandmothers aren't strong today, but there was a presence of dad in the house. But when there's not that presence, the difference today, I see the young man sometimes he's on the defense when you get him. Yeah. And so you got to break down that barrier. You got to communicate with him to let him know I'm for you.
This is an open question. Tactically, how do you go about that? Anybody respond to it? How do you tactically break down that? That's asking you as coaches and as leaders of nonprofit organizations to approach this problem as a clinician in many regards. I mean, you're being taxed as it is. Where do you begin?
Well, I think first you got to get to know your players. I mean, you got to get to know where they're coming from, what's going on, and you can do that a number of ways. You know, you can assign coaches to be mentors. Say one coach has 5 guys, and it's his job to stay on top of everything they're doing, and he's going to know really quick, and he can bring that back to your coaching staff, and then you can identify your at-risk problems that come from that, and that's to me is the best way to find that. Get to know your players.
Yeah, I agree, Glenn. That's I think getting to know the players is a key strategy for the coaches as far as making sure they're mentoring them in the right way and getting into their homes, like Glenn was saying, having a coach that was in charge of 5 athletes, that they're going to make sure that they get into their homes and meet their mom and dad or their mom or see the situation that's there. But, you know, and a lot of times, you know, it's like Glenn was talking about recognizing the problems. A lot of times those kids will be having grade problems and stuff, and you're telling them, you know, find you a quiet place at home and study. Well, there's a lot of kids that can't find a quiet place at home and study. They don't have that. And for you to know those things as a coach makes all the difference in the world and how you can motivate them and mentor them and help them through their adverse times.
All of you seem like you've accepted this responsibility. Is there a compulsion there? Do you feel an obligation to do this?
No doubt. The biggest thing I'll agree with both Coach West and Coach DW here. I think the kids got to get to know you, and you got to open up your home. Once you know what the kid has or does not have, you may want to bring him into your home.
See, now that's a huge investment that you're asking a coach to make. But I'm hearing, Glenn, you say that it's almost necessary. And Ken, you're saying you have to do it. And it's almost like there's a foregone conclusion that you have to do it. We've determined we got to do it. But that's a major thing to ask of coaches these days,
is
it not?
It's about trust. Yeah. It's about communication. And if you want to be authentic with a young man, because he can see right through you, he'll know you to your heart. What I'm saying is bring him into your environment and let him see you from a different view than just a coach.
So more is caught than taught.
No doubt about it.
They can see it.
No doubt about it.
As a kid growing up, my father was a high school coach, and we had 3 different guys live with us at certain times when their lives were in trouble, when they called out needed help, would have been homeless. And so then in turn, as I've been a coach, you know, my children have seen the same thing. We've had people in our home. And it can make a big difference, huge difference.
What about the complexity of when you have a kid, you bring him in your home? What about the tactical responsibility that goes along with that? Is that tough to juggle? You know, when you're bringing a kid into your home, now you're moved beyond the confines of the structure of the school into your home. Is that a challenge in and of itself? Are there legal issues that you have to manage? What problems does that pose?
Let me say this. And this goes back to my early days of coaching at the Air Force Academy. Had a young man out of Memphis, Tennessee, inner city kid. Couldn't get directly into the academy, so he came to our prep school. At the time, it was 24 to get into the academy. 22 could get him into the prep school. The prep school was right there on campus. Long story short, this young man came. He could have gone anywhere in the country. Very talented. His high school coach called me in one day and he said, listen, he doesn't have a home. He doesn't know where mom is. Sometimes mom was evicted. And so what he did, you talk about, he had to go through the courts, but he and his wife became, they adopted the young man. he was sleeping in a car. He was late coming to practice every day. And finally, Coach said to him, says, "Why are you late? I'm running you." He says, "Coach, I don't have a car. I don't have a ride. I don't have money to catch the bus." I said, "Well, you wait today. I'm taking you home." He lived 14 miles away from school, was running to practice and going back home.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Now, that says something about the young man because, and that's one reason why Coach took him in, because he showed substance. And so he adopted the kid, became his official guardian, and the young man not only graduated, he didn't stay at the academy, he moved on to another school, I won't mention, but he graduated, has a family now, lives in New York, I want to say now, but became all conference, graduated from school. Is because the coach saw something in him, because most kids wouldn't have come to school living 14 miles away.
Yeah.
Let me say something that kind of goes with Ken, and this is on a different angle, but I think it's very important. There was a young man that, as a freshman, we put him on the varsity, and in stature, he deserved to be on the varsity, but he was immature and probably a mistake on my part for doing it. Into that season, we ended up, he got in trouble for not doing what he should, and so we ended up kicking him off the team, and I was through with him. I mean, in my mind, wrongfully so, I just said, we don't have to do this. One of the coaches on our staff started to like the kid and started to follow him. His wife was a Spanish teacher, and the kid had failed Spanish the first semester. She started tutoring. She came back and she said, this guy's got something special. He ends up coming with the coach and staying the night before the game so he'd have a good environment. Then he asked, "Can I stay the night after the game?" Then he said, "Can I go to church with you on Sunday?" Finally, he moves in. They became the legal guardian. The kid was #1 draft choice, and he's playing in the Super Bowl this weekend.
Wow.
That's a pretty strong
That's
story.
pretty strong right there. It's hard to top that.
It
Man.
is.
That's powerful.
It's,
So what do we extrapolate out of that narrative? Is that the investment, the payoff of the investment, that it's worth it in your job and responsibility in part as the executive director of the Texas High School Coaches Association to help coaches do this?
Exactly. And that's one of the things that we try to do with our leadership summit. We specifically address the fatherless home issue. And we try to talk to the coaches about the influential power that they have on those kids and how they can make a difference in a lot of kids' life. And a lot of times they don't know who it's going to be, but coaches standing in the gap and making a difference for those kids that are in fatherless homes. And at the same time, they're making a difference for a lot of those kids just for teaching the values and character traits and work habits and all the things that are intangible things that you learn from sports are the things those are the most important things I think we have as an athletic program to bring to the educational process. And then when you add the fatherless home issue on top of that, that becomes even more critical for our coaches to understand those things.
Well, our time has pretty much come to the close on this particular session, but we have one more question, and it's really a spinoff of what Glen kind of started. I'm going to start with you, DW. That was a pretty powerful example you gave of success. Think of another one. So we'll go this way to give you time to get another. I'm sure in 34 years you've got more than one. DW, those great years at Converse Judson, give us some sense of what is the payoff for the investment in the kid in narrative form via a story of someone that you coached and now maybe doing some things that you're proud of. And I know you've got endless people, but can you pick one of many?
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind of a young man that was in a fatherless home, and his mom was dealt with drugs, and he had a lot of sisters, and it was just a really tough home environment, and there would be some times where he was the guy that was getting those his sisters up. They were all younger than him. He would get them up and get them to school, and then get himself to school. But there was times where he was late, and there was times where he didn't get his schoolwork in, and those types of things. And the coach that was working with him, found that out, and we as a coaching staff was able to help and bring some of those things around. But there's so much out there that if you don't get into their homes and you don't take the time to get to know them and to really know the kid and what he's coming from, then I think you're slacking in your responsibility as a coach.
That's rich. That's good, Coach.
There was a young man that I recruited back a few years ago. I don't want to quote my age here, but his mom and dad was incarcerated. And rather the coach let him go stay with an uncle or someone in a relative that may not take care of him in a proper way, he didn't want him to be out there on drugs. Very intelligent young man, very good player. But the coach and his wife looked beyond the field. And at the time, they had two daughters, raising two daughters in the house. But they brought him into the house, became legal guardians. And the young man, I did get to sign, saw him grow as a person, excellent student, graduated. We're getting ready to play SC in 05. We're on the field in pregame, warming up the backs, and I hear somebody say, Coach Ruck, Coach Ruck. And the stands were full. It was packed. But I heard a voice, and I looked over, and it was this young man. And we stood right there. We just hugged each other. Tears came to our eyes. Took a picture right there. Successful businessman now, family, giving back to society because there was a coach that went beyond the field to help this young man become a man.
Two things very quickly. The story that I told earlier, that young man also has married, and actually married in college, was playing for Ken. And they called us and said, is he really planning on getting, he's a sophomore in college, he's talking about being married. Nobody does that anymore. And he's going to be a college football player and be married. But I think he saw this coach that he was actually living with and saw what that model looked like. And that's what he wanted to do. And he's married. So that was just an ending of that story that I was telling earlier. There's a young man that was homeless. And how we found about him is he asked one night if he could just stay at the field house, because he said, there's a shower here and it's air conditioned. Well, when my wife heard that, she said, you're not going to do that. And he ended up being a good player for us and getting a scholarship and going on. And he called me at a really low point for me 2 years ago. We weren't playing very well at the time. And he called me and he said, Coach, I just wanted to tell you something. He said, today, I had enough money to bury my mother, and I'm proud to be able to have the money to do that, to have her a proper burial. And he said it was the things that I learned in that athletic program and in the football that helped me. You taught me how to look a man in the eye, how to do your very best every day, to be on time, to shake a man's hand. Those are the things that y'all taught me, and from that, I was able to bury my mother today. And I needed that. I needed that at that point.
Those are great rewards for coaches, there's no doubt.
Malcolm Gladwell said that the tallest oak in the forest is not the tallest merely because it came from the hardiest acorn, but it's also the tallest because no other trees block the sunlight. The soil around it was deep and rich. No squirrel chewed through its bark as a sapling, and no lumberjack cut it down before it had a chance to fully mature. Just want to thank you guys for who you are and what you do.